above all others. Certainty. If there was only certainty, and no doubt, there would be no mystery.
Today, we'll dive into the story of the movie Conclave, released in 2024. This film explores the intense politics within the church and its priests. The story begins with the death of the church's main father. What happens after his death sets the stage for the unfolding drama. Let's explore the recap to find out. Following the natural death of the senior father, who was responsible for the entire church, all the priests gather in the church. Together, they offer prayers for the departed father and prepare for his burial ceremony. The scene then shifts to 3 weeks later, where the church faces a crucial task, selecting a new father to lead them. The church was buzzing with activity. Even the nuns had arrived, and cleaning and preparations were in full swing. However, not all priests had noble intentions. Some stood in a corner, smoking one cigarette after another, disregarding the sacred atmosphere. Rumors were spreading that Father Bellini might be chosen as the next pope. He was even shown some of the previous pope's belongings. Father Lawrence took it upon himself to guide Father Bellini through the process. Meanwhile, another priest who had served as the former pope's secretary held many of the pope's secrets. He confided in Father Lawrence, revealing that on the day of the pope's death, an important meeting had been scheduled, but the pope had personally canceled it. The reason behind the meeting's cancellation remained unknown, but the former secretary felt it was important to inform Father Lawrence. Hearing this, Lawrence became thoughtful, wondering what could have prompted the pope to cancel such a crucial meeting. Meanwhile, meals were being prepared for the guests. As all the priests gathered in the hall, dinner was served. During the meal, Father Lawrence introduced a new priest to everyone. After dinner, some priests stayed back to discuss the church's future matters. Once the meeting ended, Father Lawrence approached the priest who had attended the final meeting with the late pope. He asked him what had been discussed during that meeting. The priest grew nervous and replied that he couldn't share anything, as several others had also been present. Moreover, he wasn't authorized to disclose the meeting's details. Realizing he wouldn't get any answers, Father Lawrence walked away. Later that night, all the priests retired to their rooms. The next morning, Father Lawrence delivered a speech before the gathered priests. Afterward, they all dressed in identical robes and proceeded to the sacred hall where the voting for the next pope was about to begin. The voting process began, and each priest wrote their choice on a paper and placed it in the box. Afterward, the votes were counted in front of everyone and securely stored. One by one, the priests approached Father Lawrence to discuss the voting results. During these conversations, Father Lawrence confessed that he intended to resign after the conclave, as managing everything had become too overwhelming for him. In memory of the late pope, candles were lit daily. However, Father Lawrence was deeply troubled, constantly haunted by the pope's sudden death and the pressure from others who criticized him relentlessly. One night, lost in thought in his room, memories of the late pope consumed him. He had been very close to the pope and couldn't shake off the feeling that something sinister had caused his sudden death. As he lay down to rest, he was startled by strange noises from outside, followed by the sound of a gunshot. Rushing out, he caught a glimpse of a nun fleeing the scene in a hurry. The next morning, the voting resumed. But to everyone's shock, the previous day's voting papers had been burned, adding another layer of mystery to the unfolding drama. As the scene unfolded, someone was found lying on the ground, raising suspicion and tension among the priests. Despite the unsettling events, voting continued the next day. The votes were counted again, and everyone was informed about the results. Even during meals, discussions about the voting results dominated the conversations. Suddenly, a commotion broke out when a priest angrily scolded a nun serving food and stormed off. Concerned, Father Lawrence decided to speak with the nun himself. However, the head sister opposed this interaction. After some resistance, she reluctantly allowed Father Lawrence to talk to the nun privately. During their conversation, Father Lawrence learned a shocking secret. The nun claimed that she and the priest who had scolded her once shared a relationship and even had a child who didn't know his father's identity. At first, the accused priest denied everything, but eventually confessed. He admitted that he had made a terrible mistake 30 years ago and still felt ashamed of his actions. He pleaded with Father Lawrence to keep the secret, especially since the final decision about the new pope was approaching, and he didn't want his reputation ruined. Both men broke down, sharing their guilt and sorrow, seeking forgiveness for their past sins. The next day, the final round of voting took place. After counting the votes, the results were announced, marking the conclusion of the intense and emotional conclave. Late at night, Father Lawrence was discussing the late Pope's mysterious death with two other priests. Unbeknownst to them, someone was secretly eavesdropping on their conversation. One of the priests tried to look down the stairs, but whoever it was had already disappeared into the darkness. Determined to uncover the truth, Father Lawrence approached the newly appointed priest and asked for help investigating the Pope's death. However, the priest flatly refused and walked away, leaving Father Lawrence frustrated and uncertain about his next move. An idea struck him, and he decided to visit the head nun. "I need to check some old church records," he demanded. "Turn on the laptop and leave me alone." Reluctantly, she obeyed, knowing she couldn't defy Father Lawrence due to his seniority. Driven by desperation, Father Lawrence unlocked the late Pope's room, which had been sealed since his death. With trembling hands, he began searching every corner of the room, overwhelmed with grief as memories of the late Pope flooded back. Meanwhile, the head nun, curious about what was happening inside, cautiously approached the room. Gathering all her courage, she tried to peek in, but couldn't bring herself to enter, and eventually walked away. As Father Lawrence meticulously inspected the room, he noticed a hidden compartment beneath the Pope's bed. With a pounding heart, he opened it and discovered some confidential documents that could change everything. Father Lawrence confided in another priest about the documents he had found. However, the priest advised him to return the documents and avoid discussing them with anyone else. But today was the day of the conclave's final result. Father Lawrence, determined to expose the truth, printed the contents of the documents and placed a copy in front of every priest's seat. As the priests read the papers, shock spread through the hall. The late Pope had clearly written that Father Timley must resign from his position. Stunned and panicked, Father Timley tried to defend himself, insisting it was all a conspiracy against him. But as the priests erupted in loud arguments, the head nun rushed in, drawn by the commotion. After examining the papers, she confirmed the authenticity of the documents. With no other choice, Father Timley reluctantly admitted the truth, but denied having any connection to the Pope's death. The voting resumed, but this time Father Lawrence wrote his own name on the ballot paper. Just as he placed his vote in the box, a thunderous noise echoed through the church, and the entire building began to collapse. Amidst the chaos, the priests fled to safety, bruised and shaken, as the ancient church crumbled behind them, leaving them with unanswered questions and a mystery that refused to be buried. As tensions escalated, two priests began arguing fiercely. Just then, Father Benitez stood up, commanding everyone's attention. With a firm voice, he said, "Do you know what war truly means? Ask me. I've seen it with my own eyes. I've watched my loved ones perish in the horrors of war." His words silenced the hall, and everyone quietly returned to their seats. The priests cast their votes once again, and soon after, applause echoed through the church as the new pope was finally elected. The chosen one was the newly arrived priest. After the ceremony, the new pope approached Father Lawrence privately and revealed the secret he had long sought to uncover. It turned out that the confidential documents mentioned a woman, and that woman was the newly elected pope. The pope explained that during an appendix surgery years ago, the doctors discovered a uterus and ovaries inside. Despite this revelation, the pope chose not to undergo any further procedures and decided to live as born, accepting the identity given by fate. Realizing the depth of this secret, Father Lawrence understood that some mysteries are better left undisclosed, and it's wiser not to interfere with destiny. And thus, the film concluded. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And be sure to hit the bell icon for future updates.